Some hearts take longer to remember how to love, others have been taught to forget. But sometimes love doesn't start with sparks or kisses, it begins with quiet meals. With a touch that never lands, with long silences that say more than words ever could. That's how it began at the Brooks Ranch. The hot Georgia wind whipped across the dirt road like it had something to prove, carrying dust and dry heat toward the house where the sky touched golden fields. Amara stepped down from the old pickup truck with a tight grip on the handle of her suitcase. Her fingers trembled slightly. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something deeper, maybe both. Before her stood a tall, dark-paneled house, strong, still, silent, just like the man watching her from the porch. Langston Brooks, a man built like the land he worked, weathered, rigid, unmoved. His skin was dark and sunbaked, his eyes like polished stone, unreadable, heavy with the weight of everything he never said. Amara held her breath. She'd read about men like this in her novels. Wounded, shut off, alone. This was her new husband. Arranged by his older sister, a woman Amara had exchanged letters with from the orphanage that raised her. She had dreams, woven into dog-eared books, and now she stood at the edge of something completely unknown. Langston didn't say a word. He didn't even offer his hand. Just turned and walked back into the house. Amara closed her eyes briefly and breathed deep. The wind carried the scent of wild lavender and dry earth. She adjusted her shawl, straightened her back, and climbed the creaking porch with light but steady steps. The door gave a soft groan when she opened it. Inside, the house was darker than expected. Heavy furniture, closed curtains, the kind of silence that had weight. Langston stood near the fireplace. His arms were folded across his chest, jaw tight, expression cold. The room's at the end of the hall. Right side, he said. Dinner's at 6. Don't be late. She nodded, barely swallowing the lump in her throat. She hadn't expected warmth, but she hadn't expected frost either. Behind her, the truck pulled away. The tires crunched over gravel, then silence. She was here now. This was her life. The wood stairs creaked under her step. She trailed her hand along the banister, the grooves in the carved oak, wondering how many stories lived inside this place that no one had told. The room she entered was neat but bore no flowers, no photographs, just a bed, a dresser, and a mirror with chipped corners. Tears tried to rise, but she pushed them back down. Amara had learned early life rarely offered comfort, and love, if it came at all, came with pain first. She removed her hat, unbraided her hair, and opened her suitcase. One of her few treasures sat inside, an old worn book. She ran her fingers across the cover like it was a friend she hadn't seen in years. She sat on the edge of the bed, spine straight, silent. Downstairs, Langston lit a cigarette. The flicker of flame danced in his eyes as he watched the fire catch in the hearth. He didn't understand why this woman, this quiet, brown-eyed woman, unsettled him. Maybe it was how she stepped down from that truck. Maybe it was the softness in her silence. Something about her tugged at memories he'd buried under years of dust and rage. He exhaled slowly, and just like that, in a house made for silence, separated by wood and wariness, two lives began to shift without permission. Without warning. What Amara didn't yet know was that the coldest heart on the Brooks Ranch had already started to thaw. Some hearts take longer to remember how to love. Others have simply been taught to forget. But sometimes, love begins not with sparks or kisses, but with quiet meals, untouched gestures, and long silences that speak louder than words. That's how it began at the Brooks Ranch. The Georgia wind swept hard over the dirt road, carrying heat and dust toward the isolated house that stood tall over golden fields. Amara stepped down from the pickup truck, gripping her worn suitcase, fingers trembling just slightly. In front of her stood a dark wooden house, still, cold, unmoving, and on the porch, watching with an unreadable face, stood Langston Brooks. Langston was a man shaped by the land, silent and unbending, with deep brown skin, sharp eyes, and a presence that filled the space around him without saying a word. Amara had read about men like him, scarred, closed off, hardened by life. This was her husband now, arranged through his older sister. A kind woman she'd exchanged letters with while growing up in the orphanage. Amara carried dreams stitched into second-hand pages, and now those dreams stood face to face with reality. Langston didn't speak. He turned and walked into the house without waiting. She stood still for a second, took a breath, then climbed the wooden porch with her head held high. The scent of lavender and earth clung to the wind. She pushed open the door and stepped into a dimly lit house filled with shadows, heavy curtains, and thick silence. Langston stood by the unlit fireplace, arms crossed, expression stiff. "The room's at the end of the hall, right side. Dinner's at 6. Don't be late." His voice was flat. She nodded, chest tight. She hadn't expected warmth, but she hadn't expected to feel like a stranger either. Behind her, the sound of the truck driving away vanished into the quiet. She moved through the hallway, her fingers brushing the wooden railing, absorbing the stories carved into the grain. The room she entered was clean but cold. No pictures, no flowers, just a plain bed and a mirror cracked in one corner. She didn't cry. She never let herself cry easily. Life had taught her that comfort came after pain, if it came at all. She untied her braid, set her suitcase on the bed, and reached for a faded book. Her fingers caressed the cover like an old friend. She sat down, breathing slowly. Downstairs, Langston lit a cigarette, his eyes locked on the small fire starting in the hearth. He didn't know why the presence of that quiet woman unsettled him. Something in her eyes, something in how she stepped onto that porch, pulled at the memories he'd tried to bury years ago. And in that silence, above and below, something unspoken stirred between them. Amara didn't know it yet, but the coldest man on the Brooks Ranch had already started to feel something warm move in his chest. The next morning, Amara came downstairs wrapped in a simple shawl and calm resolve. She hadn't slept much. The wind had knocked at the windows all night, and the house had stayed unnaturally still, but she didn't let it show. Her steps were quiet, composed, her gaze steady. She had learned early that sometimes kindness was the only armor the world couldn't pierce. The kitchen smelled faintly of reheated coffee. Langston sat at the table, head bowed behind a crumpled newspaper. He didn't look up. He only lifted his hand in a sharp gesture toward the empty chair across from him. The silence was dense, not awkward and yielding. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice soft but sure. Langston turned a page slowly, acting like he hadn't heard her. Then came a quiet correction. "Langston, I'm not your boss." "Not yet," she said under her breath, surprised by his response. He had acknowledged, in his own guarded way, the thread that now bound them. She poured coffee into a mug, hands steady despite his presence. Across the table, Langston didn't raise his eyes, but she could feel it. She was being studied, measured like livestock he hadn't decided whether to keep or send away. "The house is very quiet," she said, trying to gently push past the steel walls. Between them, Langston looked up briefly. "It was built for that. Peace is all I need." Amara didn't ask if he thought her presence disrupted that peace. Instead, she took a sip and let the silence resume. He stared back at the paper, not reading. Her voice had stuck with him. The way she spoke, enforced, unafraid, soft without shrinking, was unfamiliar, unsettling. It chipped at the dust he'd let settle around his heart for years. "My sister said you like lavender," he said, eyes still down. She blinked. "That's true. How'd she know?" "You wrote it. In a letter. You said you liked books, sewing, and lavender." She smiled quietly. "I didn't think anyone actually read those." He stood abruptly. "Most people don't." He walked to the stove and grabbed a mug he didn't need, pretending to be busy. Truthfully, he needed to escape her nearness. The scent of lavender on her skin was already drifting into the corners of the house. Amara didn't push the moment. She simply watched him, quiet and observant. The stiffness in his shoulders. The way he avoided her eyes. The way he handled the coffee cup, like it might shatter. He wasn't cruel. He was hurting. And hurt, she knew, didn't always cry out. Sometimes it just walked around with silence heavy on its back. No smiles passed between them that morning. No warmth crossed the table. But something was there, hanging in the air between them. Light as the dust dancing in the sunbeams slipping through the kitchen window. Invisible, fragile but real. And Amara, who had always known how to walk across tightropes others couldn't see, decided she would keep walking this one careful step at a time. That afternoon, sunlight stretched low across the Georgia sky, painting the horizon in gold and rust. Inside the Brooks house, time felt suspended. The silence wasn't just stillness, it was history. Amara moved barefoot across the wooden floor. Each step released a quiet creak beneath her, the sound gentle, like a whisper from the walls. Room by room, she took in the space, noticing everything. The closed windows that refused light. The furniture that served function but never offered comfort. Everything had a place, but nothing had presence. There were paintings, but none that smiled. Cold portraits, stiff horses, faded landscapes. Not a single photo of family. No sign that love had ever lived here. Then she saw a piano in the hallway, hidden beneath a sheet. She lifted the cover carefully and brushed dust off the keys. Her fingers touched one, and a quiet, trembling note echoed through the stillness. A breath, a heartbeat. She smiled faintly. It was the first sound that felt alive in this house. Near the stairs, she found a cabinet of old books, worn, faded, some titles unreadable, others familiar. She picked up a weathered copy of Jane Eyre, its spine torn. She pressed it to her chest, as if hugging an old piece of herself. Upstairs, led by quiet instinct, she entered a forgotten library. The shelves were mostly empty, curtains drawn tight. The air carried the scent of old wood, dust, and loneliness. She opened the windows without hesitation. Warm wind rushed in, tousling her hair, like the house was exhaling for the first time in years later. In her bedroom, she sat on the edge of a worn sofa at the foot of the bed. She wore a simple white nightgown. Her hair was pulled up loosely. In her hands, the book rested open, and her voice began to rise softly as she read aloud. This was her ritual. The way she had survived the orphanage. Her nightly prayer. Her return to herself. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. Outside her door, in the hallway, Langston stood still. He didn't know why he'd walked up the stairs. He told himself it was just to check on her, to see if she was thinking of leaving already. But when her voice filled the hallway, gentle and clear, something stopped him. Something in that voice cracked through the armor he had spent years forging. He closed his eyes. He saw her in his mind, feet tucked under her, head bowed over the book, speaking words with a tenderness he didn't know he needed. He leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by something he didn't have a name for. Her voice wasn't just beautiful. It was real. She didn't know she was being heard. And maybe that's why it reached deeper. Back inside, Amara continued reading, unaware of the man standing on the other side of the door, held in place by nothing but the sound of her soul. She had thought the silence in this house was just absence. But now she was starting to feel it differently. It wasn't emptiness. It was a request, a call. And she was beginning to answer it. The next day, the Brooks house began to shift. Not loudly, not suddenly, but in the way light slowly fills a room just before dawn. Amara didn't make declarations. She made quiet changes. A vase with dried flowers appeared on the console table. The curtains were pulled back in the living room to let sunlight in. A lavender-scented cloth passed gently over old wood, leaving behind a trace of life. Langston didn't say a word about it, but he noticed. That night, when the sky turned dark over the fields and the air cooled with the hum of cicadas, Amara returned to her ritual. A warm bath, her hair tied with a blue ribbon, a simple white cotton nightgown with lace at the top. She wasn't trying to seduce. She simply moved with grace, unaware that her every gesture now carried weight. She sat on the same sofa, turned on the small lamp, and opened her book. Her voice rose softly. In the midst of storms, some stay not because it's easy, but because there's love. Outside the room, in the hallway, Langston stood again. He didn't want to be there. He hadn't planned it, but her voice had drawn him like a thread. It passed through the walls, warm and unhurried. Every word she spoke brushed against something buried inside him. He didn't understand it. He just stood still, eyes closed, letting the sound of her reading wash over him. He tried not to imagine her knees curled up, nightgown draped softly, the glow of the lamp kissing her skin, but he couldn't stop it. And when he did imagine it, it wasn't lust that hit him first. It was the way she touched things. How she wiped the furniture with both hands like she was offering care. How she held a cup like it meant something. How she rearranged a house like it could heal if only someone believed it could. He rubbed his face and backed away from the door. Inside, Amara paused mid-sentence. Something had shifted. She felt it. She looked up, eyes scanning the empty hallway. No one was there, but her heart knew someone had been. She smiled faintly, a private little smile. As if the walls had just whispered a secret to her. Langston had already retreated to the porch. His steps were slow, like it hurt to walk away from something that finally made him feel. He stood outside, breathing hard, her scent still clinging to his shirt. He wanted to go back. He just wasn't ready. Sunlight was just stretching over the Georgia horizon when Amara stepped into the kitchen. The smell of fresh bread lingered in the air, blending with the soft hint of lavender she had dabbed on her wrists. She wore a simple blue dress with gathered sleeves, a ribbon tied at the waist, and her hair loosely pinned, exposing the curve of her neck without meaning to. She didn't know what that image would do to Langston. He was already seated at the table, same place as always. But today, his eyes followed her. Not with coldness, something else. Something unsettled. "Good morning, Langston," she said with a calm that had become her shield. He cleared his throat. "Morning." The silence that followed wasn't like before. It wasn't cold. It was tight, charged, full of what neither of them could name. She poured coffee. His eyes lingered on the bow at her waist. The way her fingers stirred the sugar. The way her mouth moved when she tasted her first bite of bread. Small, harmless things, but to him, unbearable. "Did you sleep well?" she asked gently. "Yes," he said too quickly, eyes darting away. She noticed, but didn't press. Instead, she smiled and took another bite of warm bread. A soft hum escaped her lips. Unintentional but intimate. Langston nearly knocked over his cup. The kitchen was different now. Light spilled through the open window. Dust floated in golden streaks. A room that once echoed loneliness now felt like home, and it scared him. Because everything she was, her presence, her rituals, her warmth, was beginning to touch the parts of him he thought had died. She didn't force anything. She didn't ask questions. She didn't even try. She just was. Langston tried to hide behind the newspaper, but her voice was still in his head, reading from the night before. Soft and steady, each word peeling back layers he'd worked years to build. "I need to get out early," he said suddenly, pushing back from the table. "Already? It's not even 7. Got things to handle in the field." He grabbed his hat and the barn keys and walked toward the door without looking at her. Amara stayed seated, the warmth of the coffee untouched in her hands. She watched him go, not with disappointment, but with quiet understanding. She had seen fleeing hearts before. She knew when someone was running, but she also knew what made them come back. Outside, Langston paused on the porch, her scent still on his shirt. But he didn't turn around. Not yet. The kitchen was warm that evening, filled with the sound of running water and the soft hum of an old jazz melody playing on the small radio. Amara moved slowly, her sleeves rolled up, apron tied at the waist, washing dishes as steam rose from the sink. Her movements were gentle, almost rhythmic. The house, once silent, now seemed to breathe with her. Outside, Langston had just finished. At the barn, his shirt was damp with sweat, boots coated in red dust. He walked toward the house, unaware of why his steps led him to the kitchen and not his usual retreat. Maybe it was hunger. Maybe it was hunger. Maybe thirst. But deep down, he knew it was her. He stepped inside quietly and saw her from behind. Her loose curls were tied back with a ribbon. Her arms glistened from the water. The orange glow of the setting sun lit her skin like firelight. He stopped. He couldn't move. Something about her, the way she simply existed, felt like a pull. He couldn't fight. Amara felt it too. The air behind her shifted. She turned slowly, a wet plate in her hand, and met his eyes. His gaze was steady, intense, raw. He stepped forward. Silence. The plate slipped slightly in her hand. She steadied it, but couldn't look away. He was close now. Close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. Close enough that his center sweat, something darker, wrapped around her like a whisper. His hand lifted slowly. His fingers hovered near the strap of her apron, almost touching. Almost touch. She didn't breathe. But then, he caught sight of himself reflected in the darkened window beside them. His eyes stared back, conflicted, afraid. A man on the edge of surrender. He pulled back, as if burned from within. "The water hot?" he asked, voice hoarse. She blinked. "Yes." He nodded, grabbed a glass, filled it with cold water, and drank deeply, like he was trying to cool something he couldn't explain. "Good night," he muttered, already turning away. "Good night," she said quietly, though her voice didn't quite reach him before he stepped out. Amara stood still for a long moment, hands wet, chest tight. The plate sat forgotten in the sink. She knew what had just happened. He'd fought a battle. And she had almost won. Langston rose before dawn and saddled his horse. The sky was still stretching awake, the horizon bathed in pale light. The only sound was hooves pressing into the earth as he rode toward the open fields. He needed the distance. He needed the labor. Anything to drown out what he couldn't name. Desire had grown like a weed inside him, wild, unruly, too strong to control. But it wasn't just physical, it was deeper. It was the way she rearranged a room with care. How she smiled at him even when he didn't respond. How she held silence like it was sacred, not empty. He tried to forget the night before her standing in that light, her eyes locking with his, her body barely a breath away, but the memory refused to loosen its grip. The breeze had moved her nightgown against her legs. Her skin had caught the lamp's glow like it belonged there. He clenched the reins tighter. She's just a woman, he told himself. You've lived alone this long. You can keep doing it. But his own voice betrayed him. Even out here, in the middle of nowhere, her presence remained. He could still smell lavender on his shirt. He had washed. Twice, it didn't matter. He crouched at the edge of the corral, hammering nails into the fence with rough, deliberate force. Sweat ran down his neck, mixing with dust. Every strike of the hammer was meant to silence something inside him. It didn't work. Finally, he dropped the tools and stood up. He climbed to the highest point of the property, the one spot where the wind blew stronger and the view stretched wide. He took off his hat, ran his hand through his damp hair, and stood there, chest rising and falling, staring at the horizon like it might hold the answer. But the truth was already inside him. Amara wasn't just living in his house anymore. She was in his memory now, and that was dangerous. By the time he returned to the house, the sun had dipped low. He entered through the back door, his shoulders heavier than when he'd left. The hallway smelled of fresh lavender. There was a crocheted table runner on the console, a bouquet of wildflowers in a glass jar near the stairs. Nothing loud, nothing flashy, just quiet signs of presence. Amara was there, her back to him, folding clothes on the living room sofa. She wore a simple white dress, barefoot on the rug. She turned as if she sensed him before she saw him. Their eyes met. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But in that look, there was something too real to ignore. Langston turned away quickly, climbed the stairs, entered the bathroom, and turned on the cold water. He stripped his shirt like it was fire and stepped under the icy stream. But even that couldn't cool the burn inside him, because no matter how far he rode, no matter how hard he worked, the truth remained. He didn't want her to leave. He wanted her clothes, and he was running out of reasons to keep pushing her away. The days that followed settled into a strange calm. Langston left early each morning and came back late, using the open land as his escape. But even in his absence, the house changed. Amara didn't try to take over. She didn't move fast. She moved with intention. Her changes were gentle, almost invisible at first. The heavy curtains were swapped out for lighter ones that swayed with the breeze. The living room, once dark and silent, now breathed in sunlight and lavender. She placed floral cushions on the old sofa and organized the dusty books by genre, the same way she used to do at the orphanage library. A vase of fresh sprigs sat in the center of the dining table, its scent drifting quietly upstairs. In the kitchen, she cooked the way she knew how, thoughtfully. Homemade bread, herbs mixed into softened butter, fruit sliced into small ceramic bowls. She didn't do it out of duty. She did it to say, without words, "I see you," even if he didn't yet know how to say it back. One morning, Langston walked in from the barn. He paused just inside the kitchen doorway. The smell of food hit him first, then the sunlight glinting off the clean the embroidered dish towel hanging beside the stove caught his eye at red home. He didn't say a word. He sat down, ate in silence, then left again without looking at her. But Amara didn't need words. She saw how his fingers lingered over the smooth tabletop, how his eyes scanned the shelves where books were now placed with care, how he stood longer in the hallway, as if something in the air had slowed him down in the bedroom. She had changed the sheets to soft white cotton with lace edges. She opened the windows that had been shut for years. She added a stool with stacked books and a candle on the nightstand. It wasn't decoration, it was declaration. Someone lived here now. Someone who stayed. Langston noticed it all. She saw the way he'd trail his hand over the wood where the rocking chair now sat. The way he would pause at the doorway in the evening and just look at her from afar as she read, as if trying to understand what was happening to him. But the most powerful thing she did was the quietest. One afternoon, while the sky hung low with gray clouds, Amara placed a rocking chair on the front porch. Next to it, a folded blanket, a steaming cup of tea, and a small handwritten note. Sometimes all we need is a place to sit and feel. She wasn't home when he found it. She'd gone to the barn to bring bread to the caretaker. But when Langston stepped onto the porch and saw the chair, the blanket, and her words in ink, he didn't walk away. He sat down. He didn't move for 20 minutes, and for the first time in years, Langston Brooks allowed himself to just exist. The day had been long. Langston returned earlier than usual, sweat on his brow and the scent of damp earth rising from his clothes. Rain had threatened but never fallen. The air was heavy, like it carried the weight of old memories. He slipped through the side door, moving to the small room next to the laundry where he usually dropped off his work gear. He needed a shower, needed relief from the heat and the chaos. Inside him, that's when he saw it. Folded neatly on the wooden bench was the dress Amara wore on warm afternoons. White cotton, hand-embroidered edges, a soft belt tied in a careful bow. He recognized it instantly. His breath caught in his chest. Something about its presence, its quiet waiting felt more intimate than a touch. He reached for it without thinking. His fingers brushed the fabric. Still warm, still soft, and still scented with her lavender, sweet skin, a gentleness he wasn't prepared for. He closed his eyes. This woman was undoing him. Not with seduction, not with effort. With her natural softness. With the way she smiled, even when he gave her nothing. With how she arranged books like they deserved dignity, and sang softly to herself while doing dishes. She moved like sunlight, and he had lived too long in the dark. He gripped the dress tighter, as if holding it could calm the storm inside him. But it only stirred it more. He dropped the dress, turned to the bathroom, yanked off his shirt, and stepped under the full blast of cold water. The drops hit his skin like needles, but even that couldn't cool what she had started. He leaned against the tile, eyes shut, breathing hard. He tried to remember who he was before her. When silence was enough, when his chest felt empty. But now, he felt everything and it was too late to stop. That evening, the house glowed with a soft warmth. Amara moved through the kitchen preparing dinner, seasoning chicken with herbs while rice steamed nearby. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air. She moved with practiced care. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. She quickly changed into a modest beige dress with tiny floral prints and a loose bun that let strands of hair fall around her face. She wasn't trying to call attention to herself, but everything she did pulled him in anyway. Langston came down the stairs and stopped. When he saw her, she was bent slightly, placing food on the table. The light hit her skin just right, the whisper of her clothes brushing against her body, the warmth of her presence. Every detail, unintentional. And yet, it left him completely undone. He sat down, quiet. She turned, smiled faintly, and scooped rice onto his plate. "I hope you're hungry." "I am," he said, voice low, tight. Dinner began in silence, but it wasn't cold. It buzzed. The air between them was electric, charged. Their hands moved close, but not touching. Their eyes met, then darted away. The smell of lavender lingered in the air. It had clung to the dress earlier. Now it clung to her skin. To his memory, Tachi didn't speak at first, but her gaze held him. Sweet, certain, patient. "Is the food okay?" she asked lightly. "It's good," he replied, eyes still on his plate. "Like everything you do." It slipped out before he could stop it. She heard it, blushed. He cursed himself silently, grabbed his water and drank fast. He wasn't just feeling anymore, he was breaking. And she had no idea. Or maybe she did. When she stood to fetch an extra dish, she passed behind him. A moment, a breath, almost no space between them. His skin tightened with awareness. Their arms didn't touch, but he felt her anyway. He couldn't take it. Langston stood slowly, chair sliding back. "I need to step outside." Amara paused, dish towel still in hand. "Did something happen?" "No," he said. "I just need to clear my head." He left through the front door, closing it gently behind him like a man afraid of breaking what he didn't know how to hold. He stood on the porch, eyes on the stars, lungs full of air he couldn't seem to catch. Inside the house, she didn't follow, she let him breathe, because she knew something sacred was forming in the spaces between their silence. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that hurt. It was the kind that held warmth in the corners and memory in the walls. The clock ticked past 10 as Amara settled into her favorite spot on the living room sofa. The lamp cast golden light across her bare shoulders, and her soft blue nightgown, edged in lace, hugged her gently. Her hair was damp from her evening bath, loose waves trailing down her back. The book in her lap had yellowed pages. Its scent reminded her of childhood and hope. She opened it and began reading softly aloud, not because anyone asked, but because it had become her sanctuary. Upstairs, Langston had just returned from town, tired, coat still on. The moment he stepped into the house and heard her voice, everything else faded. Her words moved through the halls like music, steady and calm. He descended the stairs, each step slower than the last. When he saw her sitting with her knees tucked under her lips, moving gently, completely unaware of the effect she had, he stopped. She was more than beautiful. She was real. He stayed there, watching. Then she turned her head and met his gaze. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She closed the book slowly. Her eyes didn't waver. Their silence was no longer cold. It was full of everything they hadn't dared to say. He stepped closer. She didn't move. Her fingers clutched the book, not in fear, but in anticipation. "You drive me crazy," he said, voice low, rough. She looked up, calm and ready. Her eyes answered for her. His hand lifted to her face. A soft touch, seeking permission. She leaned into it. Her skin warmed under his fingertips, and his hand slid gently down to her neck, as if he were memorizing her shape. Then their lips met. Not in haste. Not in hunger. In surrender. A slow, aching kiss that carried every quiet longing, every unsaid truth. His arms wrapped around her waist, and she melted into him like she had always belonged there. He lifted her with ease. Still watching her, still holding her, as if she might vanish. Upstairs, he didn't hesitate this time at the door of the bedroom. He paused. "I want to," she whispered before he could ask. And with that, the final wall collapsed. The room filled with the soft light of the lamp. The air carried the scent of lavender and skin. Her nightgown slipped from her shoulders. His shirt fell to the floor. Their hands discovered truths words never could. They kissed like people who had found home. Langston moved with reverence. She responded with grace. There were no promises, no vows, just the steady beat of a love that had fought its way through silence and fear. When it was over, they lay there, tangled in white sheets and new stillness, but this silence was different. It was safe. It was shared. He woke first, sunlight brushing across the floor. He turned and looked at her. Amara slept lightly, one hand open beside her, hair fanned out like a painting. She was soft, bare, and fully his. Not because he owned her, but because he had finally opened enough to let her in. She stirred, eyes meeting his. "You're looking at me like you just found something." "I did," he said, voice steady now. She smiled. "What is it?" "I don't know when it happened," he whispered, tracing her jaw. "But somewhere between silence and you reading by the lamp, I fell in love with you." She didn't answer right away. She kissed him instead. Then she pulled back just enough to say, "I want that too. A house that smells like bread and books and lavender. A love that doesn't hide." They held each other like people who had earned it, and outside, the land seemed to know. The wind moved softer. The sky looked brighter. Even the house, once cold and empty, now felt alive. They built slowly. Days filled with quiet joy. Little moments, Langston leaving notes on the table. Her planting flowers by the porch. Him brushing her hair back while she read. Her laughing over spilled flour while baking. One evening, while cleaning out the old barn for a small gathering, Amara tripped. He caught her instantly. "You've been clumsy lately," he teased. "Or maybe you've just been distracting me." He pulled her close. "I didn't think I could love like this." "Like what?" "With all of me, even the broken parts." She rested her head on his chest, listening to the heart that no longer hid. Later that night, they walked hand in hand beneath a sky full of stars. The scent of jasmine drifted through the air. Langston stopped. "I want to grow old with you, Amara." She looked up, eyes bright. "Then let's keep planting love every day." They embraced long and deep, as if they both knew this wasn't just a romance, it was redemption.